Hello world of YouTube and welcome to the first episode of Redacted for 2025, the show where every album has a story. Unlike years past where I've done a broad theme with this show that's carried throughout pockets of the year, instead I'm going to be using this show to sort of enhance other tangents I'm going to be dipping into this year and have some fun stuff to sort of be self-referential within the show happening later on. In fact, the subject of today's video doesn't necessarily tie into any broad themes I'm going to tackle within this show, but in fact ties into themes I'm going to tackle throughout the year, and that 2015 was a long time ago. This release dropped at the end of January of 2015 and acts as a sort of further pilgrimage down this road of polishing up a sound that was started off incredibly rough and raw and punchy, while adding more instrumental flares here and there to show some real artistry. It's a two-piece that I think is pretty solid on their own, but I think when bringing together creates a more fruitful, interesting experience. Today I'm going to be bringing together the third and fourth albums by Gent Pariah's Periphery, the twosome of the Juggernaut, Alpha, and Omega that I'm bringing together into one experience, and we're going to call it Juggernaut, Alpha, and Omega. Now these two records, unlike a handful that I've covered in this show, actually have a pretty distinct through line across the duology. You know, there's a real A and B that each record sort of leaves you in, with this concept dealing around this child born in this hellish cult and being jailed for at least a good portion of their lives before going insane, going on a killing spree, and then ultimately killing themselves, and going on this sort of self-introspective journey while they dwell into hell. Which I do keep, you know, with a clear distinct A and B. I more, with this Redacted, wanted to sort of weave parts of the records that could be woven together while having a distinct A and B portion. You know, there are a series of planting and payoff moments throughout the distinct sort of moments that the band made, and my goal was more to use the first half to set up and the second half to act as a sort of series of actions where the protagonist really does start to lose his mind. All the while trimming some of that fat that relies on both of them, mostly Alpha's track listing, and create an experience across this duology morphed together that feels about the length of your average Periphery project. You know, I don't hate this release, by the by. It's not, I would say, my favorite release by the band, but I think the band does a pretty good job at retaining their heaviness while having some interesting instrumental offshoots to showcase more of their sort of talents as musicians. But honestly, this Redacted was really straightforward. I wanted to start off on a pretty simple but effective note this year, and I hope you enjoy what I've got going on. My version of Juggernaut is an hour and 8 minutes and 14 tracks long, so let's go ahead and show off the track listing before breaking it down track by track right now.
Embrace the feeling of our human skin, intertwining now with far from the earthly boundaries, hands. I find safety in these lives. It's always better on the other side of it. Wanting what you never had. Shed is a god machine, running with no direction. Watching time as it draws a prescribed your dog. Now we search a little deeper for what our actions will come. Was forced to the screams will echo on a quiet night. Silver faces on a disconnecting sight from sound. I break down, fucking I can't wait back. Blind wire.
Minute acts as this overture for the whole record that introduces some of the players at hand and sort of the mood, while also being a sort of planting moment in the progression of telling this story. I think it's a nice booming anthemic intro that doesn't necessarily lean into some of the heaviness, but I think helps introduce the band really doubling down on some softer ideas in glorious splendor before pivoting into The Bad Thing, which more focuses on some of the inner darkness dwelling within the protagonist. It's a fucking heavy-ass jam that honestly mirrors a moment that was originally at this point in the track listing MK Ultra, but I put this here because it really flips some of the, you know, anthemic ideas into some true darkness that I think is sort of important to where this story goes by its end, and I want to introduce it early just to keep it in the listeners' minds before pivoting into the other big player in this story, Priestess, a song that's a little bit more mellow but leans into the love interest that but leans into the person that cares for the protagonist while he's kept up in his cell, and somebody that he's wanting to take away with him when he eventually escapes this hellish prison. Spoilers, he doesn't fucking do that. But it's at least a sweet moment early on that is sort of used to further flesh out introducing some of the players at hand, which is a big portion of this first stretch of the record especially. And while that's one of the true sonic deviations that I kept from these two records, I mostly from this stretch on just kind of doubled down on either the progression of heaviness the band is doing or the more prog melodic stuff that they were also trying to expand on from their second album into this. With Alpha, a song that sort of feels like a more broad thematic jam. Like, it's got some sonics that definitely kind of feel like tangents for the band and have a lot more of a melodic lean, but also lyrically sort of do a good job at cementing the listener in sort of the self-loathing filled headspace the protagonist might be feeling while being a little bit more broad about it. It's one of those great songs that concept records can have that has some broader appeal that I wanted to keep here for that very reason. While a lot of the album has been a lot of setup, I wanted to sort of cement the listener in something a little bit more straightforward from there. Which from this point, I kind of keep the record in its own pacing how it is on Alpha, with Alpha going into 22 Faces, going into Rainbow Gravity. Two songs I kind of feel like they go hand in hand with each other. 22 Faces sort of setting up the protagonist sort of developing this multiple personality disorder seen through as a reaction to sort of years of torment in this hellish prison that sort of gets further explored on Rainbow Unicorn. On Rainbow Gravity, two incredibly heavy jams with that production increase just showcased in spades. And it acts as a moment to sort of see the listener delving further into madness, which gets sort of push even farther in the song after that, Psychosphere. A song to sort of send off this first half with the protagonist insanity being shown on full display. You know, all of the pent-up, you know, self-loathing and anger sort of illustrated on the last couple of tracks really coming to this intense head that sort of casts this half off into the horizons with another just heavy, big-ass moment that gives way to this reprise of A Black Minute, where the sort of refrain of that song comes back into frame. It's a little bit more of a melodic sort of break before going back into some true heaviness with MK Ultra, which while lyrically it would kind of make sense for it to come during the first portion, the setup portion, I wanted to use it as an illustration of just how bad the protagonist has had it, leading up to the moment that sort of carries throughout the last handful of tracks on this second half. With Graveless through Stranger Things really being how Omega just kind of carries out for a certain point, with Graveless being a moment where we see the protagonist really snap, and MK Ultra is supposed to be that sort of like look back on what brought him to this moment before he breaks out and goes on this intense killing spree with another song that is just heavy as hell with some just intense ass riff work and pummeling drums, with Four Lights being wedged beneath this stretch to sort of act as an instrumental extending of this killing spree that is going on before Hell Below and Omega and Stranger Things are meant to act as the protagonist's journey through hell. You know, Hell Below is the moment where the protagonist does kill himself, and it's this just stomping, slow, lurching track with some fun jazz play out into its outro, woven throughout its outro to help lead in to Omega's sort of noodly piano intro, which is meant to act as the protagonist's descent into hell. It's just like, it's this over 10-minute odyssey that I think encapsulates this protagonist's journey very eloquently, that I think helps lead into the closer of Omega and My Juggernaut, Stranger Things, where he gets a little reflective now that he's in this hellscape on what brought him to this point. Something that can be seen as sort of a bookmark through this portion. You know, MK Ultra shows his journey before he does all these violent actions, and Stranger Things is meant to be sort of the reflection after all that happens. It's another big outro that leans even farther into some of the prog offshoots the band was really sort of experimenting with. And I think it sends this album off in spades with some really strong musicianship driving the song, going through, and help add some weight to the sort of pensive thoughts that the protagonist is sort of going through on his journey through hell. And again, while it was a very simple Redacted, that's my version of Juggernaut Alpha and Omega. Do you like it? Do you not? Would you like to listen to it? Linked in the description, our YouTube and Spotify link. If you like this episode of Redacted, give it a like. If you want to see more, consider subscribing. I usually drop 2 to 4 vids a week, depending on what I've got going on. I may or may not have a video going live tomorrow, but if not, I'll be back next week with another handful of videos to help kick off February, along with this sort of introduction to how the format of what's being posted when is really going to come to light. But either way, thank you for watching this. I'm going to go out and viral rack you guys with good lessons situations, and I'll see you another day.